All right, everyone. We are live with RPM's Q1 live stream. I am joined by three other distinguished colleagues of mine. We have John, Mason, and Karen. I'm Sean. We'll jump right into kind of what we're seeing throughout Q1, recapping a bit of what we've already seen, dive into what we think the future might hold, and hopefully give our carriers, customers, and anyone listening in some ideas and solutions they can apply within their own organization or drive conversation across their organization. So um, high level, what we've seen in Q1, I would say across the automotive industry has been um, wow, what a mixed bag. To be quite honest, I think we were all stepping in 2024 really hoping that this would be a year of normalization after some really challenging years coming out of COVID, uh, whether it be chip shortage, whether it be capacity shortage, rail complications, anything you can name. I feel like the industry's experienced at this point, mixing a strike, which we talked about last quarter. And, I think we've seen anything but a normalization. When you look at the macro picture, we have obviously high interest rates. We don't know what the Fed's going to do there. That obviously weighs on financing options for consumers. We have automotive supply chains that are, again, reorganizing themselves when you think about tensions with China and trying to nearshore supply chains and what that might do. You have even consumers saying, I can't really afford vehicles at the top end of the trim spectrum. So our automakers are starting to think about producing mid-tier or lower-tier models so that affordability comes back into play. Um, and then you kind of layer in, I would call it an industry-wide transition from potentially ICE to EV, with a lot of the news being, well, is the demand really there, and or is demand really slowing down for EVs, while automakers continue to promise bringing a ton of new models into the fold over the next 24 months realistically, with a lot having 2025 like goals to bring multiple new models to market. So um, I would say all of that presents a cauldron of challenges we have to navigate. And high level, that's kind of how I see it. But John, I want to throw it to you to talk through really like what you're seeing on the freight side more
Yeah,
specifically.
yeah. So the freight side's been a long year and a half, right? I
Mhm.
kind of compare it to like a Michigan winter when it just never seems to end. You think it's going to end, and like you get a nice day here, and all of a sudden you're back to where things stand. But the market's obviously been it's been very loose, so there's a great deal of capacity out there, and I don't see anything changing in the immediate near future. There's just with interest rates where they are, you have an election year, of course, which always
Oh,
has impacts on things.
I didn't want to get into politics.
I know I'm probably not supposed to touch that, but so you have
Leave
an
it to
election
Jen.
year, which I think a lot of people are waiting to see, who's in office and what that's going to mean from a capital investment standpoint. And then a lot of things that are happening, I don't think we're going to see any difference from a demand standpoint. So there's nothing that I see in the horizon that's going to create, demand. I think if anything does change on the freight side, it's going to be more driven by supply. And rates have been suppressed for quite some time now, and I think they're getting to a point where I thought the waterline was hit maybe back in the fourth quarter of 2023, but they still continue to go lower. And I don't believe that those rates are sustainable. Matter of fact, I know a lot of those rates that are being proposed right now are providers trying to keep their volume levels in place and just keep the wheels turning, but not necessarily good long-term decisions, for their fleets. So I think at some point it will turn. I've been doing this for longer than I care to say, um, and it always will turn. I just think it's not gonna turn from a demand standpoint probably until 2025, the beginning of 2025. Um, so there's a lot of factors in play there, but that's kind of the general what we're seeing on the freight side. And we're here at RPM. We've made adjustments, of course. Obviously, our rates have become more competitive to play in the space,
Mhm.
but we're not notorious, or we're not recognized as being the low cost provider. We put value in our equation, but we understand things will change, and it's just a matter of time, and we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, and I think a big thing with that, and Sean alluded to it with the EV push, is a lot of the OEMs, last year and prior years, they announced that they wanted to push more EVs out to the market, and as of late, they've kind of scaled that back a little bit. But at the same time, you still see the urgency for those orders that were already put in. You mix that with some of the OEMs and some of production issues when it comes to holds and things like that. You have OEMs that have plants that have been making cars for 50 to 100 years now, and
Yeah.
you throw an EV into the mix, it does throw a little monkey wrench in there. And here at RPM, we've done some things to make sure, with some network synergies with other OEMs, to make sure that we're still ready, that we can keep our carrier base happy and moving. But at the end of the day, with the EV challenge, the ups and downs of the rail, I know we talked about it in the last live stream, and Sean alluded to it, but Q1 we saw a dip in rail capacity, and signs are pointing to it maybe coming back a little bit. But with the rail, you never know, and short sea vessels as well. There's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of challenges with the OEMs, and they're trying to work around it. And the highlight is definitely the EV and the push for that. And as Sean mentioned, with these tier 1 trims that they're going to be pushing out, that's going to require more vessels, right? Those are made in over the border and overseas and things like that. So demand is still there from a carrier point of view, right? And it's just a matter of navigating the space in terms of plant holds, production issues, rail capacity, and things like that. You're starting to see more longer haul and over the road to kind of alleviate some of those things. But yeah, we're new technologies have been implemented here, and I think we've done a good job navigating Q1 thus far with the challenges that we've faced.
Yeah, regarding the tech items that Mason just mentioned, we've really spent the first quarter bringing our internal systems up to the next level. So just the core of our internal platforms and systems to support freight, vehicle, regardless if it's an upturn or a busy time of year, slower time of year, we're using that time in the first quarter here to really start improving our systems, finding out where we can automate to help out, to support the business, whether it's our external partners, our customers, our carriers, our internal operations teams. We're finding different ways to automate the holds that Mason mentioned. We're working with our external customers to automate those processes. A year ago, it was Excel spreadsheets and emails going back and forth, a single unit here, there. Now it's automated. We're looking at our TMS system, looking at statuses and things like that to automatically update units across the board between platforms so that there's no latency and delay in those updates. We're looking at market trends. We're using machine learning. There's all sorts of, really fun things that we're doing on the tech side to support, freight and vehicle within RPM. The first quarter, we sat down as a IT org and really laid out what can we do for this year? What is going to really impact RPM, our customers, the carrier base? What can we do? And we started on that 90-day path. And it's been great. We're about halfway through. We started a little later in the Q1, but we're about halfway through our 90 days, and we're chugging along fast, getting our systems up to speed. So when freight picks up and things are off hold and things like that, we can really move forward quickly.
Yeah, and I would be remiss not to bring in the remarketing side of our universe too. Mason, you did a great job talking about kind of what we're seeing in the OEM world. The remarketing or used car side of the universe, which is in a lot of ways much bigger, even more complex in some different areas. We're starting to see, as I mentioned prior live stream, green shoots within that space. I think those have continued to grow. The nature of that business is certainly changing when you think about high interest rates and credit squeeze and what that's doing for consumers in terms of cash flow to be able to meet debt obligations, i.e., repossessions are going up, which presents challenges to our transportation network and our carrier partners. And, that's a facet we've had to account for. It's not just lease returns. It's not just get it to the nearest auction and keep it moving. It's been, it's been challenging these organizations to really take these assets and find the proper sales channels for them to make sure they're a saleable vehicle in some cases. And at the end of the day, that side of the world is met with its own challenges while this renormalization period happens.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see over the next 90 days and into May generally, with tax season around, you do see an increase in the used market a little bit. But, as Sean mentioned, with credit squeeze and higher interest rates, I am curious to see how the next 90 days plays out and see if those trends that we've seen over the last couple of years kind of come to fruition, or if the market adjusts just a little bit because of, those things that you mentioned.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at used car prices, I think they've normalized a bit. Some have even increased a little with the chip shortage, or not the chip shortage, the holds we've been seeing across, or production challenges across multiple OEMs that have been in the news. You've even seen the days of inventory start to go down from, I believe it was 55. Now we're down to 50 days of inventory, which is pretty impactful. So there's even a squeeze in terms of availability of inventory again. So all these factors are really going to play out in an interesting way over the next 9 months. I want to turn our attention a little bit to kind of the here and now, or what the next quarter will realistically bring. I mean, when I think about the new car market, I think automotive finds itself in a massive transitionary period. You have hybrid technology being considered, hydrogen technology being considered, EV technology being considered, along with legacy ICE technology. A lot of cases, those are different supply chains that are going to challenge our customers. And I think it's important that, as we think about our customers' challenges and then building a network to fit those challenges, it's really going to be incumbent on, us in conjunction with our carrier partners to really drive different adaptable, flexible solutions to that environment that isn't going to be steady, even though I think we all hoped it would be steady coming into this year. I don't know if you're seeing that on the inbound side of the world.
To play off of that, but you mentioned having flexibility in this market. So again, I'm on the freight side of our company. The inbound production from the tier 1 suppliers to the OEMs, or even from tier 2 to tier 1. And when you see a lot of shifts from one vehicle to another, or even from an ICE platform to an EV vehicle, it creates a lot of pressure on the supply chain. And when that happens, obviously, the more flexible your partners can be, the more you're going to rely on what services like we offer, which is a very flexible product. But what's happening, what we're seeing is, we may win a contract lane that's moving 5 times a week, once a day from Michigan to say Texas, and all of a sudden, a week before it's running for 4 or 5 weeks, and then they announce it's only going to move 2 times a week. And now you need to, and that's a major adjustment that you need to make to accommodate that. And that's happening more and more as we see the fluctuation in demand, and kind of the overall, when you have some of these production gaps, that's the ripple effect it does have. So it's just a matter of offering flexibility and as much transparency and communication as possible.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the flexibility too from the OEM side of things and with our carrier partners is, with the increase of holds and, minor production issues, our carrier base is flexible, right? We work with anyone from the 9-car haulers to the 5 and down to the 3. And so when you have a large influx of units going on hold, well, we have to pivot, adapt, right? We have to, ping other carriers that maybe have the smaller equipment, because at the end of the day, even if units still go on hold, there's going to be units that maybe not be in major metros that still need to get to dealerships, right? Especially in the EV realm, as we just spoke about, the urgency for that, right? And I think RPM, here we've done a great job of being able to have that flexibility to get those units where they need to be, regardless if it is a full truckload or not. And I think our carrier base has done a great job, pivoting up and down, especially with, as Sean just alluded to, hybrids and EVs and changing load factors, when you're putting these things out and having to bring in different types of trailers, working with trailer companies and these manufacturers. And just like you said, John, just communicating with the OEMs, the customers, the plants, just to try and get ahead of it a little bit. Because at the end of the day, we still need cars on lots. There is still a demand out there. But it's compared to previous years, it requires a lot more pivoting and flexing up and down, that's for sure.
Something you brought up earlier that I think is important to bring in here is I think a lot of our customers are looking upstream to address distribution challenges when you think about Mexico and getting product out of there or bringing product from overseas. Obviously, we've seen cars and containers. We've seen short sea mitigation strategies. So you're talking about a network that has a set plan to start the year, and we've already seen plenty of, I would call the network planning team at our customers has been awfully busy out of the gate, really shifting distribution to places where, oh, we told you there'd be this many VINs coming into an entry point. Now it's going to be double or triple. Or, oh, wait, there's not going to be as much, and we're going to shift it to this port or place of entry. And to stand up a carrier network as an asset-based carrier, obviously those folks are really good at specific things, and to build a whole driver network to serve that point, and then for the volume to be half and or double, now all of a sudden there's a challenge that has to be met there. And I think that's where we've found a ton of success working alongside our customers to say, what is your strategy and where can we plug into that? I don't know if you want to talk out more to that.
And when it comes to that, compared to now, versus previous years, a lot of the OEMs, they want to hear about our network synergies, right? Mm-hmm. They want to hear about where we're delivering into, where we're picking up out of, even working with one OEM versus the other. They want to hear what we're doing so they have a good understanding of where capacity is positioned, where, they could potentially position short sea vessels or even rail cars coming in. You brought up a good point, Sean, in terms of Mexico and crossing the border. Units, I know we talked about on last stream, but, units coming in on containers and things like that. And, we've worked even closer with other carrier partners of, maybe we don't have the capacity to get it from over the border and into wherever it needs to go. But, we're working with another carrier that does, and then we have a handshake and pass it off to us, and we can take it to wherever it needs to go in the United States. But there's been a lot more collaboration with OEMs in terms of our network synergies, much more collaboration with other carrier partners to make sure that at the end of the day, the job gets done. So, it's a lot of pivoting and flexing, and I know that we rely on a lot of tech for that as well, too. So.
I was going to say, I think you mentioned all the collaboration and being flexible, and it dumps right into IT, and and we have to then pivot and change what we're working on and find some solutions like the holds. We have shipments ready to go be picked up, and then nope, sorry, can't pick those up. So we got to bring them back internal, and make sure the carriers aren't picking them up. So we've created internal tools. We have a really extensive shipment builder internal to RPM that we are continuously improving and working on, and it allows ops to quickly pull units and reshuffle the deck, and get a better load factor, get better units depending on the carriers that are available, depending on what units are now not available, right, and creating another load. So we've had to pivot a lot on the IT side just to support our internal business, let alone our customers and the visibility that they want to these constraints within the network. And so we have to make updates very quickly to the data, I'll say, that's going back and forth between parties so that they can see it real time and know where the units actually are and follow them. So we've had to very quickly pivot in those areas so that there's visibility.
Yeah, and even with the holds, you know, like you said, we may have a truck dispatched or maybe even on site all the time. But you know, even with the cars going on hold, eventually it's going to come off, and it a lot of times through the pressure to get that car to final. You know, a lot of times there's somebody waiting on the other end from a sales perspective, right? That they maybe don't quite understand why it went on hold or what the issue is or what the delay is, and so, you know, as the holds come and they're released, that pressure increases, right? Allowing us to once again, like we mentioned, be a little more flexible, pivot up and down a little more to satisfy who's ever on the other end with the customer as well.
Karen, I know we were talking about Legos earlier.
We were.
And when you were talking about the shipment builder, I often think of vehicle distribution, especially in today's environment, as like, as if you're building a Lego, and then all of a sudden someone comes along and says, well, I'm going to take these 3 pieces away, and now you got to build a whole new thing. And how do you use the pieces you have in front of you to kind of rebuild that thing? And
Yeah.
I mean, what a unique
It's a great
challenge that's sort of on
analogy.
an ongoing basis.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
wild.
And that's constantly, we have that big bucket of Legos that we have to make the best loads.
Exactly.
Yep, great comparison.
And John, I want to turn to you because, you know, obviously making the fully formed baby, if you will, the finished vehicle is what, you know, the inbound side kind of rolls up to make happen. And we've talked about the challenges there. I mean, what do you think, you know, our customers need to be thinking about as, you know, the production schedules are changing, the model mix is changing, and where is that world going to go?
Yeah, I think they have to think what we talked about before is how can we be as flexible as possible, because there's no, you know, the one thing I've learned in this business is there's no certainty, right? You have a great plan, and then, you know, 2 weeks later that plan is shot because they're having, you know, quality issues with that supplier, and you have to shift. So it's just being able to have a flexible plan and being able to understand that that is going to be part of what, you know, happens in your daily business, and you have to have alternative plans, and so you have to have that contingency plan in place. Because I don't see these, you know, the one thing I kind of should have touched on a little bit more when we launched is, you know, where I see things going from a pricing standpoint is, and that's what's going to be an issue here, because a lot of the carriers are, you know, are being very aggressive in these bids. We just went through bid season, right? We just finished bid season. It was a really busy bid season. Customers trying to take advantage of the current rates, and, you know, I've in the last few weeks I've gotten some really good feedback from customers on you know, pricing, and I'm seeing rates that people are proposing, and I look at them and I'm like, this is not sustainable in today's world. I mean, we all know operating a truck costs considerable money, and those costs have all gone up. Not one of them has gone down. Think about
2005's back again.
I mean, but think about it from this vantage point. You literally have driver pay up. You have cost of fuel, right? $4 a gallon on average, you know, right around there.
And been climbing
recently. And then, you know, of course, insurance, which is something you don't really see, you know, that we don't talk about very much, is insurance. So I feel like what's going to happen with some of these carriers, eventually, and this is what will happen on the supply side, is they're going to either, you know, the service is going to degrade on those lanes that they're hauling at those lower rates. If the market does flip and goes up, they're going to probably stop backing away from those lower rates and going after higher paying freight. So I think the customers have to plan for that. If they're going to, you know, utilize these carriers that are coming in their annual bids at the, you know, the low point, they're going to have to figure a plan B and make sure that they're measuring that. Because if you have a carrier that's primary on a lane, but you're only using them 50% of the time, and you're going out to the spot market in more of an ad hoc basis, the other 50%, it may not be a savings at all. So it's just, you know, keeping a very close eye on what's happening. And I mean, they want to absorb as much data as you can give them. And that's what, you know, I feel is a game changer for our customers, is the data that we can share to give them, you know, educate them on how their business is impacting us. And you mentioned collaboration. And one thing I've seen more in the last 6 months than I have in the majority of my career is customers really want to understand our cost drivers. They really want to understand what is impacting your cost at that point, and how can they adjust what they're doing. Oh, can we move this pickup to, the morning hours so you don't have to pick it up at 2 a.m.? Or this milk run, do we have too many stops and maybe we should pull 2 off and ship them LTL? And there's a lot of collaboration that's happening to understand our costs and then for the customer to actually go back and try and make accommodations to their network to, fulfill that.
Internal, we are collecting a lot of that data that you mentioned on the pricing side, and we have our own internal pricing engine that we call Hydra, and it's doing just what Jon mentioned. And we're collecting a lot of data. We're looking at seasonality. We have over 10 different factors that we take into consideration in our pricing engine to make sure that we're not driving the market in one direction or the other. As a large company, we have to make sure that we're not out there increasing, costs, and that we're helping with the business and pricing. So we are internally every day we're looking at what did the pricing engine do yesterday. We're making sure that we're setting the right prices, and we're being collaborative within the network. And that's Hydra, our internal pricing engine. And it's been going good. We've had it in production now for, I think, almost 6 months-ish. And so we've collected a lot of data, and we're just constantly improving that in all of those different factors.
And I got to jump in here real quick because one of my dream state things, now that you're bringing up pricing data, is I would love nothing more for us to go back to customers with that data insight and start to talk about where we are seeing costing from call it spot versus contracted, which is a freight concept that's been around forever, but in vehicle nearly non-existent, and really start to give them insights around how the market is behaving from like cost indicators, whether it be market specific, whether it be model type specific. We know every region of the country. We know every OEM produces, some produce one model, some produce seemingly 100 models, and any amount in between. And there's a bunch of data points I think we can glean and put around that unit, if you will, to start to return data back to them and say, did you know that this particular model type, given how it's combined with other models, actually is a cost driver of transportation versus actually the more you have in this mix, the better it may be for shipping if you mix them with these model types because they're sort of complementary in terms of what can fit on a truck. I mean, that's all stuff that I start thinking about when we sit in front of our customers like Mason just did with one OEM and talk about kind of what data we have and what we can share and how we can make them more intelligent about their own network.
Yeah, make better decisions.
Yeah, and you can even stack layers on it. And Jon brought up a good point about being prepared and having a game plan, and all of a sudden that game plan changes, right? Well, take the pricing even further with Hydra is maybe looking at where rail stands right now, right? As Q1 kind of started, rail capacity, it started to open up a little bit, right? OEMs were able to get cars on rails. Now, as we kind of start to go to Q2 a little bit, now it's starting to dry up a little bit more, right? Which in turn is going to cost a little more. It's going to cause longer hauls across country, right? You're going coast to coast now because, especially coming in up on the end of the quarter, end of the month, with a rail taking 12 days versus putting it on the car, right, or on a truck hauler, you can really take a look from 30,000 feet with the use of, tools like Hydra and things like that to kind of see how it correlates with the rail and seasonality and pricing and how much capacity is out there for the rail. And, I'm excited like you are, Sean, to kind of put this information and dive deeper and deeper and deeper and have these layers that we can present to these OEMs for solutions.
Well, what's nice is not only can we present it from the finished vehicle side, but we can also present it from the inbound side. And one thing I haven't talked about today, we also do aftermarket parts. So, right, we're doing we're touching all phases of the vehicle. So when we really want to get collaborative with an OEM, we can have a very intelligent conversation, about their entire supply chain. And I think that's unique to RPM.
Yeah, Mason, I'm glad you brought that point up. Because I think when I think about making dynamic decisions in the finished vehicle distribution world, I would say that's a concept that at times hasn't really existed. It's sort of, this is our set game plan. Wait, there's deviation. Okay, we'll use a mechanism like spot buy or just kind of sweep up the mess and hope it goes back to normal. But what is normal anymore? So I think when you think about making much more short-term dynamic decisions based on like a data-driven approach, I think that's where having that sort of the moment costing data can help you make I think the procurement folks would say an intelligent decision, but also we know ops and procurement is where kind of the magic has to meet. And ultimately, having that sort of rooted in financials decision-making criteria while also looking at the realities of the operation is I think a place we can take that sort of information we can return to the customer.
No, exactly. And, to keep stacking layers on it too, it's, there's, when the rail does dry up or vessel capacity gets short, right? Then we're even talking about kind of reverting it back to those network synergies of, is it feasible to rail into a different location? Is it feasible to drop a vessel in a location that they don't normally, right? And all of this talking about the pricing and capacity and being dynamic with Hydra and things like that, you also have to take into effect too, and the OEMs are starting to more and more about, emissions and sustainability and things like that. How do they eliminate that a little bit more while still trying to navigate all these challenges of kind of all the things that we just talked about a little bit? So again, there's a lot of complex, I don't want to call them issues. I think they're more of just a challenge for everybody, including the OEMs and, folks here at RPM that we're trying to overcome. But, there's been a big push for sustainability. And then when you throw in, like I said, all these dynamic layers, it creates us to create better solutions on our end as well. So.
Oh, we have a question. Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, if the Fed hopefully does lower interest rates, I think we're all rooting for it, especially if you want to refinance a mortgage. And financing a new vehicle becomes, I guess, more affordable. I don't know how a vehicle's affordable given some of these prices I see, but yeah, what behavior does that have in the used car market? And I think this is going to be purely a personal opinion, but I think what we will see is potentially, a dent to residual values of used vehicles, or making used vehicles more affordable, which allows some people to jump back into that market, makes those more attainable, because I believe in both segments, considering a purchase, there's people definitely sitting on the sidelines saying like, I'm going to keep driving the wheels off this thing, or I'm going to take this lease to the very end if I have to, or maybe even buy the vehicle after and figure it, just sort of delay for hopefully a brighter future. And I think that could drive more remarketing demand, but I think really remarketing is going to see its normalization next year. That's what a lot of our customers are saying. As you think about people who gained leases in 2022, let's say, as OEM production was coming back, and we obviously saw that from the new car side, people jumped into new vehicles, and usually those terms are 3-ish years, or even people that buy are kind of like 3 years and out. That's when that sort of activity is going to really kick into high gear again. And for now, we're going to be on the repo bridge to to that world. And we've actually identified some partners in that world where we want to go to folks that own these assets, who have to potentially engage a repossession partner, and maybe they're working with someone who's really good at getting a vehicle away from a consumer, but then how do you get that to the proper sales channel? And we've identified a partner that we want to offer kind of a holistic solution in conjunction with. to say, hey, from someone's driveway, unfortunately, to an auction location or a sales channel, we can support that transaction. So that's one solution we've recently brought to market, and we're looking to hopefully accelerate that here in the coming months. But remarketing, I would say, has been, it was what we started our vehicle product with. It's a customer base we're very loyal to and look to grow here in 2024. And ideally, if the Fed does its job, we see there being a positive impact to that space overall.
And I think that market is seeing an increase right now, tax season, like you mentioned earlier. And I think they're also starting to see what the OEMs are doing as far as visibility, driving SLA down, moving units faster. And so we do have partners that are reaching out that want new tech implemented for them, where
that
historically
space needs it.
Yeah. Yes. And so that's another thing we had to hurry up and pivot for, right? Is the visibility on the retail remarketing used car market. And we've been collaborating with our customers to provide that visibility and allow the units to be measured more efficiently, because that market has a lot of steps that have to occur before a unit can be picked up. Does it run? Are there keys? Things like that. And so there's a qualification process. So the SLAs might be longer than on the OEM side, but they're starting to implement a lot of these other OEM practices as well. We've seen, especially with visibility and wanting to know the status of these units each day, because they might dwell a little bit longer than normal
I'm
unit.
so glad you brought that up, because what I've observed in my only 3 years in the vehicle transportation world is remarketing customers think a lot about owning these assets and getting them sold, and don't necessarily view transportation as some sort of value-added activity. And I think we're starting to see customers view it very much as a value-added activity, that visibility to where these assets are in that transportation leg of its journey is incredibly important. I think it's ripe for a technological partner to come in and give them a host of different tools. I view selling a vehicle much like a mortgage in a lot of ways. There's all these parties that have to be involved. There's, state licensing, there's a financial company involved. And so a lot of that is still stuck in practices that are 30 and 40 and 50 years old in some cases. And is there an opportunity to sort of modernize that experience? Because it is regulated. There are all these parties involved. And at the end of the day, I very much view transportation as an area they can add value to that transaction, where historically it's kind of been a necessary evil in the chain of different things that have to happen to a vehicle to get it sold.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the same thing you said earlier about, with the holds and the OEMs and getting from Excel to an automated process. I mean, everybody's trying to find that automation, including, the retail and the remarketing and the used car space area. Everybody's starting to advance a little bit more, whether you're an OEM or an auction or whatever the case may be. And like you said, Sean, visibility is crucial right now. Even with the OEMs, everybody wants to know where their car is. Some of
Breadcrumbs.
the breadcrumbs, getting it visible. And especially when you have direct to consumer, right? There's still some OEMs that we're a part of that, we're showing up to their driveways and dropping these cars off and giving them that experience and that service. And so just the increased visibility, the increased tech across the board, it's kind of where the industry is definitely heading. As long as you can keep us out of Excel, that's what I need.
But I think, Karen, you brought up the PQ process, as we kind of refer to it internally. That a component of that visibility is really giving both customer sets really a robust narrative on the history of that vehicle. And I think when I think about where our technology is going and the ability to give each customer base sort of a history of what's happened with that order, is where our data enrichment, I think, is going
For sure.
to really return value to the customers, because we start with a VIN and there's a whole story that builds around that. And how do we return that back to the customer so that they can make an educated decision or understand kind of what plays out in the network is really, really where we want to go. John, obviously we're talking about concepts that have been so well worn in freight.
I was quiet for that.
Yeah.
I was well
Been
behaved.
doing that for a while over on the freight side.
But obviously, I think for me, the biggest theme in freight, especially automotive freight, is Mexico.
Yeah.
You know, we have to talk about what's going on in Mexico, what you're seeing in terms of Mexico being a part of the supply chain.
It is becoming a much bigger part of the supply chain
Yeah.
is what's happening. So, basically you've had a lot of, companies that near shore from maybe what was overseas in China now to Mexico. And it's always been, the movement's always been happening. If you talk to any tier one supplier, even OEM, they have a presence in Mexico. So cross-border solutions, it's just a part of the equation. And what's happening and what's been happening for so much of the freight is moving northbound, from interior Mexico up into the Midwest, Southeast, and so forth, that there is a significant imbalance between northbound and southbound in Mexico. And we're working with partners to try and, create lane balances with our partners in Mexico. And one thing that's helped us, tremendously over the last, we've had people embedded in Mexico, that are working with our carrier partners and our customers as well to close that gap. But yeah, Mexico is going to be a part of our life, and we just need to figure out how we can create more visibility around the border crossing portion of it. Right, that's where I think the hangups happen. It gets to the border and they're trying to figure out why it's stuck in customs for 3 days, or how we can clear it faster. And our goal is to really streamline that process, make it a door-to-door solution that provides constant visibility throughout the entire supply chain. And we've been working on that, and we've made some tremendous strides. We got a ways to go still. There's a lot of it's different, but we feel we'll get there. And the other, that's just something that we got to kind of continue to focus on and find the right solution.
Yeah. Speaking of solutions, I think, it's probably time to turn our focus to Q2 and beyond. Q2 being right around the corner. We have maybe a week and a half left in Q1. We've talked through a number of challenges that are happening in what I'll call the automotive supply chain, and a bit of the macro picture as well. I guess I'll start off with saying, when I think about what the automotive industry is going to look to do for the Q2 and beyond this year, I think about, from an outbound finished vehicle standpoint, how can, you brought up bid season. How can it translate from a procurement activity that's got a 3-year timeline to being a much more dynamic process as we move forward? I think, there's always this clash, as I mentioned earlier, between ops and procurement. And I think as OEMs continue to see a dynamic environment that they have to operate in, no longer can you continue to procure transportation on a protracted cycle, expecting that scenario to play out. While it feels really good from a budgeting exercise, I think at the end of the day, there's a bunch of data from the last 3 years that would tell you that your plan is going to perform only, maybe 60% to plan. So how do you start to identify potential partners that can address the stagnant, steady, plannable parts of your network, the 60% that does go to plan, and then where does the 40% that breaks? How do you wrap your arms around that volatility or variability in the supply chain and say, maybe there's an alternative here, and make it much more dynamic, whether it's shortening procurement cycles, whether it's splitting up how they procure, an origin location. I think that's where a lot of wins can happen, because we see that sort of recurring procurement activity throughout the year, whether it be on short cycles like spot buys, or we're going back out to bid because we've had, complete failure. On the inbound side, I turn it over to
Yeah.
you. 'Cause-
Well, everything that you mentioned there
Yes.
requires visibility.
yes.
Right, that's the key thing, is visibility in data.
Yeah.
Like our customers, they'll take as much data as we can give them so they can make those decisions. They can make, sourcing decisions based on where the supplier is, or production even decisions on where the supply will come out of. So it's, for us, the solutions that, I think we can talk about AI, we can talk about all the great things we're doing, which are great, but I really think it comes down to the fundamentals. And our customers want to absorb as much data as we can give them. And, they want to know that, once they have that data, they can work with us to kind of formulate a plan on how to put that in action. But visibility, that's something where our customers, like, we try and automate the process between, shipment and finding the right truck for that shipment and bringing that together. That is our goal internally, to automate on the freight side. Where customers want to automate, they don't want a human touching the shipment once it's tendered, right? Once the EDI tender comes over, and knows the carrier to route it to, or the provider to route it to. Then the TMS is updating pickup, updating in transit milestones, updating delivery, POD, and they don't want any, as little human interaction as possible in that transaction. Let their employees and their personnel work on other, more strategic goals than checking to see if a truck is, in route, or if it's picked up. But what that does require when you put not all your eggs, but when you rely on a TMS, is it has to be accurate, and it has to be, even one or two not updating it creates a problem. So they want it to be, everything to be updated in real time, so they have visibility to what's happening and they can make decisions on the fly, as well as then take that data and make more long-term strategic decisions, on the data points that we've shared.
Oh.
Earlier, you mentioned that RPM has a marketplace for its vehicle and freight carrier network. Is the goal to expand the RPM marketplace to include cross-border moves for carriers in Mexico?
So the question was around our marketplace, which John, you actually just mentioned, with automating
Yeah.
the carrier selection process on the freight side, and the question was surrounding getting cross-border moves into our marketplace. So I guess I'll start with marketplace for the audience and what that is. Marketplace is our tool, which is external to our carrier base for selecting a load. It's really a one-stop shop for our carriers. And we recently got freight into marketplace, just Q1. That was a big item in Q1. And so we're going to continue growing that in Q2. But I think, yes, we definitely want to get the cross-border moves into marketplace, vehicle side and freight side. It gets, having that one place for carriers to go into, they can search by price. They can see, I have to travel now, I've dropped off my load, I'm going to have an empty truck. Is there anything available when I have to go back to home base? So this tool, marketplace, that we have allows them to look and see what fits their need for their company, a specific driver, any size company, and really hone in on what they're able to move. And so, yes, getting cross-border shipments into marketplace will definitely reduce the burden of manual efforts within RPM as well, because the Mexico moves are tricky, as John alluded to earlier. There's a lot of paperwork involved and things like that. So automating any portion of that process, especially on the border side, would be efficient.
And I think also too, it really leverages our carrier relationship. Kind of like you said, there may be some external applications that work similar, but you don't know necessarily who you're calling or who's going to be on the other end. And this is more automation where the carrier has a little bit more control and able to leverage that relationship that we have with the carrier to be able to be a little more self-servicing from an automated point of view with our marketplace.
Yeah, and we use Hydra as part of that, our pricing engine, so that we ensure we're not setting too high of a rate. So I guess you could compare it to almost an eBay, right? Buy it now. I want to ship this load now, and they can select it. Or wait, see on pricing. We use Hydra to predict what range is going to be efficient. What can the market sustain? So all those tools are all intertwined within our tech here of Q1 and moving into Q2, just improving them. And even the carrier selection process, profiles on the freight side. I think, John, you had mentioned that to me the other day about the carrier selection.
Yeah, I think that's huge, and it's one thing I did want to touch on. In today's world, when you're making carrier selection, it used to be check the box, they have insurance, they're good to go. I mean, I hate to say that's kind of how a lot of brokers operated, where we do a much deeper dive. We have 3 platforms that we work with that fully vet our providers, look for because one of the issues that we face today is double brokering is happening quite often. Fraud, is happening. And when the market gets slow, like it's been for sustained 16 straight months, right, is the manufacturer index we're in this contraction, which was actually followed by 28 months. I just read this yesterday, so I'm repeating it now. 28 months during where it was expanding. So, but I do look to that to kind of see where we're going. But you got to figure that eventually, the vetting that we're doing for our providers, we look at, how big is their fleet, and, our audit and pay will look at, how much does it match up with how much freight they're moving to their volume, to how many trucks they have in their fleet, their inspection ratio. And these are things I worry about, because I'll say it's been a really tough bid season, right? I mean, everyone, it almost feels, and I said this earlier, I hate to say, a race to the bottom. And customers are asking for their most aggressive pricing. And I've seen pricing that I know is not sustainable, which I think eventually will, have an impact on things maybe in the third and fourth quarter. But, that pricing is not sustainable. And one thing that worries me is when carriers struggle, that's when things get missed. That's when their insurance policy may be adjusted to maybe a lesser, cargo coverage or lesser liability. That's when their maintenance gets pulled back a bit. And so now you're, putting trucks out there that maybe haven't done the maintenance they normally did every 6 months, and now they're doing it every 9 months. So those are concerns when pricing gets low, and we're there. I've seen some rates come back that I'm like, at that rate, I'm sorry, we can't help you.
Yeah.
So we really focus on vetting our carriers throughout both sides of the organization. We work with top tier providers that want long-term partnerships and value what we bring to them, which is, they're our customer too, right? And we know as a broker, our carriers and our customers are our customers. And that's one thing that we're really focusing on in 20. We've always focused on it, but I think we've doubled down on it in 2024.
Yeah, and I think going into Q2, that's going to be one of the main focus for the OEMs is, more highlights on quality and carrier vetting. And, Sean and I were talking a while back of, when COVID was happening and the chip shortage and dealer supply was low, they wanted the car, right? They wanted the car. And now the Q2 outlook is, we're increasing how we vet carriers using, other applications to help us with that. But the carrier quality, how old is the truck, the emissions, all those
How long
things.
has the driver been there?
Yeah, how long is the driver? How do you train the driver base? Those are all things that the OEMs are asking, and they're going to continue to ask as 2024 rolls on.
Yeah, tools like our marketplace and driver app only give us more data and relationship sort of connectivity to these drivers to drive a higher level of quality.
And rest assured, we have our own internal application profiles that combines all of this data, external, internal, that we're collecting into one place for our representatives to select the proper carrier. And so we combined it all into one, so that there's just one place for everybody to look and make sure that it's the right carrier selection.
I think I'm getting the side eye from our producer here regarding our time
What
limit.
did we miss?
What topics we miss?
I think to put a bow on this conversation, the automotive industry we live in, we know is full of challenges. I mean, John, you've been doing this a bit longer than the rest of us, and
Thank you.
have
Thank you,
said
Sean. I don't know what that means exactly, but I'll take it as a compliment.
you have more experience. And we know it's always a moving target, and there's always new challenges. And as we look towards Q2 and beyond, certainly, you mentioned all the challenges within the freight market at large. Obviously, automotive is a much smaller component of that massive world. So the contextual universe it's playing in
Yeah.
is certainly important. But as I think about the outbound world, you know, Mason, you hit on it. The rail has been performing here in Q1. We've started to see that shift a little bit with customers taking different strategies for off-rail business, relay points, et cetera. I think that will only continue through Q2 in the run-up to production shutdowns midsummer. So Q2 might be an interesting ride. We know capacity from a hallway standpoint has gotten a bit stronger, but we know the rail accounts for a lot of the demand the OEMs have, and if it can't support that, that's going to overwhelm the car haul market. So we'll continue to keep our ear to the ground in terms of how that shapes up and return that information to our customers in terms of what we're seeing in the market as we're out meeting with them, whether at their headquarters or whether we're going to be, meeting with them face to face at Finished Vehicle Logistics in Huntington Beach again, which I know everyone looks forward to every year. So very much looking forward to talking to our industry peers in May about that. And we'll also be at Auto Intel Summit talking to the remarketing space in terms of what we're seeing with our partners at Cherokee Media. So looking forward to both of those industry engagements in Q2. I don't think we have anything else. Does anyone have any parting words, last plug they want to get in before we call it a wrap?
No, I think you did a great job
Yeah.
wrapping it
Great.
up.
Well, thank you, John, Mason, Karen, for joining me. And we look forward to our next live stream.
Thanks,
Thank you all.
Sean.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.